I bought a small piece of land at an auction for $75,000, surrounded by forest, covered in trash, but hiding far more than the photo had revealed. To my surprise, the property had more than just trees. There was a small shack and a garage, its entrance completely blocked by piles of garbage. When I arrived, the grass was tall, the air heavy. It was clear this place had been abandoned for years. As I inspected the land, I came across an old, rusted tractor. Attached to it was a pallet fork. If it worked, it could be useful, but it was in terrible shape and nearly out of fuel. I kept exploring and made my way to the garage. Getting inside wasn't easy, but I managed to push through the trash, blocking the door. Inside, I found a mower. Old, but clearly restored at some point. At the back of the garage, I spotted a box. When I opened it, it was full of old clothes, still in good condition. Heavy to move, but maybe a source of profit in the future. Back at the tractor, I confirmed my fears. It was too damaged and nearly dry on fuel. This had once been a repair station, but fixing it would cost me $675. And I had zero. Even the pallet fork needed repairs. I needed quick cash. While searching for anything of value, I stumbled on a well. Something to check later for daily water. Then, hidden among the trash, I found a sealed black bag. When I opened it, inside was $1,000. Finally, hope. But as I explored further, I heard a loud buzzing sound. Getting closer, I realized it was an abandoned beehive. I ran as fast as I could before things got dangerous. With the money, I repaired the tractor for $675 and the pallet fork for $77. To my surprise, the tractor roared to life in the very first try. The farm was finally starting to evolve. I drove it out into the sun and began collecting all the piles of trash. Each one earned me $2. Soon, I cleared the garage entrance and pulled out the mower and the heavy box of clothes. The land was looking healthier already. Next, I detached the pallet fork and hooked up the mower. To my surprise, it worked perfectly. I cut through the tall weeds and overgrown vegetation until the land was completely clear. For the first time, the place felt alive again. Finally, I used the tractor to move the heavy box of old clothes. It wasn't easy. I had never used equipment like this before. But I managed. I left the box in the sun to check its condition. And just then, the tractor ran out of fuel. Back to square one. After a moment of thinking, I remembered some workers fixing a power pole nearby. I ran up to them and explained the situation. To my surprise, they immediately agreed to help. We went back to the land, and they checked everything carefully. They told me they would bring a jerry can of diesel tomorrow morning, and I could take a little rest until then. The next morning, I woke up early and waited for them outside. As soon as they arrived, they filled the tank with 25 liters of diesel. I tried the tractor, and it started immediately. I told them I didn't have much money, but offered $20 each. They refused, and I thanked them sincerely. I decided to sell the old clothes, and to my surprise, each 1,000 liters was worth almost $20,000. I quickly went to the store and sold everything, making a nice profit. With the money, I went back to the store to get something to collect the grass I had cut. The owner suggested an old manual baler. I was a bit suspicious, but decided to go for it. On the way back, I took a sharp turn and accidentally dropped the baler right next to the workers. They didn't say a word and kept working. Once I tested it, I realized the baler worked perfectly. Each bale this old baler produced held about 500 liters, and I managed to make 4 solid bales of grass. I carefully stacked them inside the garage, safe from the rain, thinking they might come in handy later, especially since the land already had a small sheep pasture. I decided to sell the baler and the mower, since they no longer had any real use for me. To my surprise, they still fetched a decent price, giving me a solid bit of profit on top of everything else I had accomplished. With every task I completed, the regret of buying this sketchy auction plot slowly faded away. Still, the day had been exhausting, so I decided to lie down for a short nap. But just as I was resting, an architect suddenly showed up at the farm looking very concerned. He explained that some of the old trees were rotting and posed a real danger. They could collapse onto the shed at any moment. His advice was clear: they needed to come down immediately. I wasn't expecting that, but I thanked him sincerely for the warning. So I headed to the store and browsed through their wide selection of tools until I picked out a chainsaw that felt right for the job. The moment I got back, I wasted no time and started cutting down the trees that threatened the shed. I even dug out the roots, making sure they wouldn't grow back. But then I miscalculated. One of the trees fell the wrong way and struck the side of the shed. Luckily, no real damage was done. I trimmed the branches to make it easier to handle, then turned to the largest tree of them all. This one was different, heavy, solid, and stubborn. No matter how much I cut, it refused to fall. I had to bring out the tractor, carefully pushing against the trunk until, slowly but surely, the giant finally gave way. I cleared away the branches and got straight to cutting the tree into pieces. What I didn't realize at first was that the logs were far too big and heavy to move, so I had to cut them down into smaller chunks. But then it hit me. I had no way of transporting them to the sawmill. Carrying them one by one would take forever. So I headed back to the store to see if they had anything cheap I could use. At first, it wasn't easy to find the right thing. But after some digging around, I came across a rear box attachment. It wasn't perfect, but for only $247 to rent, it would get the job done. Once I got back, I cut the logs down into more manageable pieces and started loading them into the box. It quickly became clear that the weight was adding up, and I didn't want the tractor tipping backwards. I raised the box just enough to test how much it could handle, then threw in one more log before heading straight to the sawmill. When I arrived, I immediately saw where I could sell the wood. There was a supervisor standing nearby, but I didn't have time for small talk. I was buried in work. After unloading, the sale came to $606. Not bad at all. Happy with the profit, I kept on cutting and hauling the remaining logs. Later, I'd deal with the other trees. But for now, removing the dangerous ones was the priority. I took another trip to the sawmill and sold the load. This time, it brought in $476. Not a huge amount, but still better than nothing. As I was about to leave, I heard a whistle in the distance. It was the supervisor. I walked over, and he started by complimenting my shirt, saying it looked sharp. We chatted for a while, and what he told me was actually pretty interesting. He mentioned that there were contracts available and demand was high. It could be a great source of income for the future. I thanked him for the tip and headed back to the farm. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I needed to check it out as soon as possible and see what kind of jobs were on offer. Once I got back, I parked the tractor and went straight to look through the contracts. To my surprise, there was a huge amount of demand for labor. Plenty of work out there, even from him. While I was still thinking it over, the architect showed up again, this time with his wife. They explained that she was a remodeling designer, and since my farm clearly needed improvements, I listened carefully to their ideas. Something immediately stood out. My house was unsafe, with no fencing around it. I agreed with their concern, and they offered to start work right away, focusing on securing the area around the house. The only problem? I still didn't have much money to spare. They began working on remodeling the house, and the deal was to keep everything within my budget. While they handled the renovation, I decided to take a walk through the woods to clear my mind and think about future projects. When I got back, the work was already finished, and what a transformation it was. From the safety fencing to the flowers that perfectly matched the environment, the whole place looked amazing. I was genuinely satisfied. Then came the moment to talk about prices. We went back and forth for a while. The cost was higher than I had hoped, but the result was worth it. In the end, the bill came to just over $11,000. I told him I'd get back in touch once I had a bit more financial breathing room. It had been a productive day, and I was happy to call it an early night. The next morning, to my surprise, I actually overslept, something that had never happened to me before. Still, I quickly adjusted my plans and focused on what I needed most, finding a steady source of income for the farm. Slowly but surely, this farm is starting to come back to life. If you watch until the end and enjoyed it, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel.